Listen, the dolls smoke weed. Am I wrong? No, look at them. They're torching it up. I saw Chucky and Tiffany smoking weed, so I decided to smoke weed.
I saw Katie Heron wearing army pants and flip-flops, so I bought army pants and flip-flops.
I know I've used that Mean Girls reference before, but it's just too good. Also, every time that I put this shirt on, I can't help but thinking about that meme where it's like me and my hot goth girlfriend doing whatever she wants to me. And that's a great energy to have. Like, come on, baby, let me do some weird rituals on you. Oh, baby. Sorry, if you're a sub and you know me, you know I can't make a clean introduction. We gotta get a little bit down and messy first. My tea. Oh, this is essential. This is essential. Delicious. Okay, don't forget, it's right there. Anyway, obviously today we are talking about the man, nay, the doll, the boy, Chucky. We're comparing the original Child's Play from 1988 to its 2019 remake. And this is a big one. Like, what an exciting day, folks. We're gonna start with all the relevant behind the scenes information, the box office info, historical relevance, and such. Then we'll compare our characters, our Karens, our Andys, and of course our Chuckies. Then we'll compare style, so the writing, cinematography, the look of the doll, etc. Finally, what themes are being explored in either movie. Then we'll top it off by trying to decide which is the superior film. So let's just kick things off, shall we? No more dicking around. Over on Twitch, which will be linked down below, I did a researching day and some of you guys showed up to do that with me. So we looked at old behind the scenes featurettes, retrospective interviews, and even some kind of like vlog footage of Kevin Yeager's workshop. The original Child's Play in 1988 was written by the incredible Don Mancini and was directed by the man Tom Holland. We also talked about him a little bit during my Halloween videos, and he's also well known for directing Fright Night in 1985. One of my favorite fun facts that I learned about Tom Holland was during one of the retrospective interviews.
For a long time, one of the most frightening memories I had was as a small boy being afraid of my toys.
One of his biggest fears growing up was his toys. And I don't recall being scared of my toys when I was little. Maybe at some point I've thought about it. But have you seen toys from the 40s, 50s, 60s? What were these toy makers on? Well, they were probably a little bit crazy from all the lead paint that they were exposed to, but that's a tangent. The original script of Child's Play was very different to what we got on screen, so let's talk about that a little bit. One of the biggest differences is that the original script was very much inspired by early Spielbergian suburban movies like Poltergeist. But Mancini said during the audio commentary that he was really glad for the change, and he also referenced Candyman as being another amazing urban horror movie. True facts, babes. The original title of the movie was going to be Batteries Not Included, but unfortunately Spielberg was actually working on a movie of the same title. So that was a no-go, but then the working title became Blood Buddy, because his original story involved Andy having some kind of blood pact with the doll, and I can't with that. Oh, I just realized I'm not wearing my rings. Hold on. You know you're having a bad day when you just forget to accessorize. But anyways, the point is they went through many rewrites to land on the final script. But let's talk box office, because they made the original Child's Play with a budget of about $9 million, and then it went on to make about $44.3 million. And if you adjust that for today's inflation, that's over $108 million. Also, during the initial release, there were protests outside of MGM that wanted to ban the movie because they thought that it would incite violence in children. Just one question. Was it crack? People are so fucking weird. But that movie was obviously a smashing success, and within 2 years, they pumped out Child's Play 2. And yes, I did rewatch the sequel after I rewatched the original. I had to. Then that sequel led to another, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another, until finally in 2019, they kind of veered off course, they took the rights, and they said, we're doing a remake. And the remake has shockingly similar box office numbers. It cost $10 million to produce, and in the box office, it made $45 million. When you factor in inflation, obviously the original was a lot more successful, but if you just take the numbers at face value, they're about identical, which I just find weird. For some reason, that doesn't want to compute up here. Don't know why. The remake is also another unfortunate case where the behind the scenes and the featurettes and the interviews, they are all marketing based. The same thing happened with the Pet Sematary remake from 2019, and it's just upsetting to me how lame featurettes and behind the scenes has become. On my DVD copy of Child's Play from 1988, there are so many cool featurettes. One of them was even a whole section of like 4 different scenes that offered audio commentary from Chucky himself, not Brad Dourif, but the character of Chucky. Just fun, cool stuff like that on behind the scenes is not even considered anymore. Boo, boo, tomato. Here are a few things that I have learned about this remake though. It was directed by Lars Klevberg, who is from Norway, and in multiple interviews, Aubrey Plaza seemed kind of stuck on the fact that he was from Norway and was a part of the Norwegian military, because I guess that's kind of actually how he ran the set.
Well, one thing you should know about Lars Klevberg is that he was a sergeant in the Norwegian army for 6 years. He ran the set as if we were in the Norwegian army.
Sure.
But the cast still managed to have fun on set because apparently they would prank each other a lot. This new cast also did not feel very comfortable around the puppet.
Did you feel comfortable around those Chucky dolls? Because they are ridiculously creepy.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like, no.
It's an interesting contrast to the original cast because Alex Vincent as a 6-year-old handled being around the doll remarkably well. Granted, the puppeteer team let him control it. There was constantly a huge crew of people running the doll on set, so there wasn't really too much to be afraid of. What I learned about the remake that stuck out the most, I think, was this really brief interview I saw with Don Mancini.
They asked David Kirshner and I if we wanted to be executive producers. We said no thank you. Obviously my feelings were hurt.
Absolutely.
And I did create the character and nurture the franchise for 3 fucking decades.
Right.
So when someone says like, oh yeah, we would love to have your name on the film, and it's like, it was hard not to feel like I was being patronized.
Yeah. They weren't asking for your creative involvement.
Yeah,
they were asking for you
they
to
just wanted
bless it
our
and walk
imprimatur
away.
of, approval, which I strenuously deny them.
It's sad, but now we can look back from 2022 and we can be like, don't worry, Don, you're gonna get the first season of Chucky and everyone's gonna love it. But that right there gives me a little bias against the remake because I don't like when they do original creators dirty like that. Same thing with the Pet Sematary remake too. It's an interesting trend I see where you have like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake from 2003 that I have covered on this channel, and they go so far as to try to hire a couple of people that were on the original team from the movie in the 70s. But now, almost 20 years later, it is just abundantly clear that these remakes are most often a cash grab. But that's pretty much gonna do it for all of my behind the scenes stuff today. Let's break down the plots of these movies, shall we? In the original, Charles Lee Ray, infamous serial killer, transfers his soul into the body of a good guy doll. Karen, desperate to give her child a great birthday gift, purchases the doll off a peddler. When supposed accidents start happening around young Andy, the police become involved. As their situation becomes more dire, Chucky finally reveals himself to Mike Norris. Chucky meets his dramatic end over and over in the grisly finale. In the 2019 remake, Buddy dolls are now all the rage. Essentially this universe's version of an Alexa, Buddy is a high-tech device that can manage your entire cloud and home. In an effort to make Andy's birthday better, Karen takes home a defective doll from work. What starts as the friendship Andy desperately craved turns into a living nightmare. Chucky turns to violent measures, even going so far as to hijack an entire store of Buddy dolls to ensure that Andy will be his friend till the end. Lots of major differences, right? I enjoy both movies' plots. We'll get more into my preferences when we get to the themes of either movie, but just at baseline value, I think they're both great premises. On the one hand, soul of a strangler trapped in a little toy, and then on the other, it's evil technology, so just very different stories. I think one major story issue with the remake that I have trouble with is the fact that they aged up Andy so much, because it is just a little bit weird that a preteen like him would have that kind of a doll. To be clear, it's not because teenage boys shouldn't have dolls. It's just that is not something you would commonly ever see in our society. Like, it just didn't feel too realistic. But it's so weird because I appreciate all the ways that they tried to make the story different, because I felt like they were going about making a remake in the right way. But some of the choices are just flops. I think the stakes are a lot higher in the original because, number one, you have a child that's taken away by social services. There is a mother trying not to lose her son. In the remake, it's like, this kid is lonely and your Alexa is gonna try to kill you in your sleep. Allegedly, these are just jokes. Jeff Bezos, don't have me assassinated, please. There's just obviously much more of a human element to the original. The remake also has these weird tangents, like Andy's cop neighbor, the updated Mike Norris. His whole subplot with his mom and anything revolving his character didn't contribute much at all. But despite it all, despite all the flops, I think the story of the remake overall is decent. Where it kind of kills me with the remake is where the ending basically turns into Saw and Karen is just strung up, and for whatever reason that's really anticlimactic to me. Especially after seeing the mascot be murdered, that was insanely brutal. In the end, I was just kind of underwhelmed by the story, and I think it all has to do with the stakes. It's pretty basic that Buddy is just gonna end up killing a bunch of random random people when in the original you had this horrid swine of a human being trying to put his soul into the body of a 6-year-old. One issue with the story of the original, though, is something Don Mancini also has a gripe with. There's kind of a double mumbo jumbo type of moment when you see Chucky using a different form of voodoo to kill the voodoo master. Also, write 'em up, boys, we got another mystical Negro stereotype. It's just a product of the times, but it is cringy nonetheless. But anyway, in an interview, Mancini himself pointed out that he thinks it's kind of silly that Chucky would suddenly use another type of voodoo because that would have made it so much easier for him to kill everyone else in the movie. But one of my main gripes with the original story is something that just kind of throws off the flow and makes the pacing a little weird. They play around way too much with the, ooh, is Andy's doll alive or is he just a crazy little kid? When we saw Charles transfer his soul into the doll in the beginning of the movie. It's supposed to be dramatic irony. I guess, you know, we know something that the adults don't, and it provides a little more tension in those scenes where Andy is alone with him. An example of where this works is where Andy is trying to talk to Chucky in bed and he's trying desperately to get him to say something, and Chucky looks over to the door and he sees the shadow of Karen's feet, so then he responds in the doll voice.
Hi, I like to be hugged.
These kind of moments allow you to see how smart and conniving Chucky is. But for the most part, I'm like, let's move it along. We know that he's alive, so why are we spending 45 minutes with the characters pretending that he's not? Another thing, and actually the first couple Child's Play movies are really guilty of this, but it takes way too many tries to kill Chucky. But fun fact, this ending sequence was inspired by the Terminator because that guy just, you know, he just kept getting up too. And this movie is also a comedy, so I think it's a little bit self-aware in that respect, but it does get really repetitive. But speaking of Chucky, the Terminator, and icons of the like, let's talk about all the characters. I think we can start with comparing Mike Norris. Brian Tyree Henry is a lot more charismatic. Chris Sarandon plays him so straight, and this is fine. This is also kind of a product of the time and being a cop in a movie. That's just the demeanor they had. And while occasionally a little more cringy in the remake, Brian's Mike Norris was just a bit more likable. It's really too bad that his character didn't mean much. He was pretty much just adjacent to all of the events that transpired, but pretty much irrelevant otherwise. In the original, obviously, he is a lot more involved. In the opening, he is the one who's chasing Charles Lee Ray in the toy store and having the shootout. They have this pretty intense, shared, traumatic experience. There's a level of vengeance to both of their motives, which is something you obviously can't really get with an AI doll. So it's tough. With Mike Norris, I think you just win some and you lose some on both ends. Karen goes hands down to Catherine Hicks. It's just not even a comparison. I love Aubrey Plaza, but she is not believable as a mother. I see her as an older sister, which I guess when you get pregnant really young, that kind of a relationship can happen. So it's not that that's not a realistic dynamic that can develop, but she's just so flat. It's like she's never not giving April from Parks and Rec.
Well, I'm so sorry that you didn't read the box. And even there's a window that you can see that his hair is red.
Thanks.
Thanks for shopping at Zedmart.
And while we're here, we have to talk about Andy because these characters just go in tandem. In the original, Andy is set up as this super sweet, innocent little kid who is making his mom the most disgusting breakfast I've ever seen. Inspired by the real life of Don Mancini, by the way. He would do that for his mom. And when he brings it in, you just see this adorable chemistry between Karen and Andy, and it's really believable. In the remake, they establish Andy as this little piece of shit.
Whoa, you look like shit. What happened to you?
Thanks.
You better never tell your mother that, and I'm so serious. And they also establish him as having no friends, and it's like, gee, I wonder why. And they try to recreate that sort of tickling scene from the original, but it's more like play wrestling. I don't buy it. You can't have my money. So how we're meant to sympathize with these people that have no chemistry and are pretty openly mean to each other, I have no idea. It's an obvious win for our original duo. Also, I forgot to mention the acting differences between our Andys. Like, this scene of Alex Vincent just sobbing gets me every single time, and I feel like nothing that the actor did in the remake really impressed me on the same level, you know? So there's also that. Before we talk about the star of the show, I just briefly want to mention I hate pretty much all the other characters of the remake. By that I mean all of Andy's friends. They're garbage. I do not have a good time when they're on screen.
Let's move, Dick Turd. Your sister's pretty hot.
Dude, that's my mom.
Even hotter.
And I get it, preteens are are horrible and annoying. When I was 13, 14, I too was horrible and annoying, but I don't find the entertainment value in spending time with those kinds of people on screen. So finally, let's compare Chucky. I've ranted on this channel many a time about how blessed we are to witness the talent of Brad Dourif. It was super interesting to rewatch this movie after I did my whole Child's Play series last year and I covered the TV show, because his Chucky voice from the beginning up until now has totally been crafted and honed and kind of perfected to its iconic current sound.
Hi, it's me, Chucky. What do you think?
It's different in this movie, it really is. But it's still wonderful to see the honestly not so humble beginnings. I mean, the sheer amount of people and movie magic that went into bringing this doll to life. I'm gonna get more into that during the style portion of this video. With the remake, I do think that Mark Hamill did a good job. He's a great voice actor. He also did some voice acting for, I think, one of the animated episodes of the Creepshow series on Shudder. I don't love him as Chucky, but I just don't really think it's fair to compare him to Brad Dourif when the original Chucky has probably the most iconic voice in horror history. I can't really be objective. And also the fact that he's playing artificial intelligence, you can never really get the full spectrum of emotion, but he still was able to emote a surprising amount within the constraints of what being a robot character means. So I don't think it's Hamill's fault that I don't consider his performance to be comparable to Brad Dourif. I feel like he was just working under way more constraints. Since we're on the topic though, let's shift gears and talk about the styles of these movies and the look of either Chucky. In the original, they went through the painfully long and tedious process of slowly morphing Chucky's face to be more human as the movie goes on. Mancini mentioned that they more or less abandoned this as the franchise went on, but in this movie, it is so effective. It's one of my favorite style choices because he goes from being this cute little toy to showing all of the cracks of his disgusting human personality as the movie goes on. And the team of people that it took to make this happen was crazy. Kevin Yeager was the head of the team that was making Chucky, and I did show some B-roll of his workshop. But fun fact, he and Catherine Hicks met while they were working on this set, and they've been married ever since. But anyways, so the puppeteers. On days where Chucky had to both walk and emote and speak and stuff, they had a team of no less than 8 people working on him at one time. There was one guy who was in charge of eyebrows and cheeks. One guy was in charge of just doing his eyes. They had one guy just doing all of the jaw and lip movements. My tiny brain can't even begin to fathom the coordination. And to think of all the versions of his face and his hairline that they had to use. Not to mention sometimes they used Ed Gale, who was a little person, to play Chucky. The scenes where they needed Chucky to have the most range of motion, they would put Ed Gale into a Chucky costume and they blew up the sets by about 1/3. And I find that so fascinating because in the movie you don't even notice. It's so seamless. Movie magic, babes, what did I tell ya? In the remake, obviously Chucky stays the same the entire time because there is not a decaying human soul inside of him, but luckily it was done practically again with a puppet, only with CG used to enhance his eyes. But the look of the Chucky doll in the remake is one of the biggest points of contention.
Narcolet! Shut up, shut up!
Ollie, what do you think of that?
Not great.
It's not good. I don't think that it's quite as bad as everyone made it out to be back when the look of Chucky first dropped when they were doing promo for the remake. But maybe it's just exposure therapy and I'm not being as objective as I should be. I don't find the look to be that bad anymore. But it does go without saying that I much prefer the look of Chucky in the original. I think that there was just a lot more attention to detail when it came to his look. In the remake, the farthest they ever went was just changing the color of his eyes. Like, okay. I think in terms of the balls to the walls factor, let's call it, both movies went off the rails in great ways. Both movies do use practical effects. One of the best effects in the original is definitely that explosion in the toy store. And in the remake, a lot of the deaths are very brutal, and my favorite moment by far is definitely when he hijacks all the other buddies in the store. The remake is so mean. Karen's asshole boyfriend's death is probably the one that's most referenced from this movie, but my favorite death is actually the mascot in the store. The deaths in the remake are honestly definitely better than the deaths in the original now that I'm thinking about it. There's also a definite color scheme to the remake, which I've mentioned before, but it's just very blue and red. I think it just goes with the Buddy aesthetic and also the fact that his eyes go from blue to red. So it's a fun and constant style choice, but ultimately I don't really know what it adds. Like in some shots, even if there isn't stylized lighting, they made sure to put Andy in a red or blue sweatshirt, and it's like, cool, you made sure that you got some red in the shot, but why? When it comes to the lighting though of the remake and the color choices, I do think I actually prefer the remake because there wasn't that kind of attention to the style in the original. And also with the cinematography too, you have a couple of really great kind of POV shots when Chucky is coming at Andy, but I think that they could have played with his size, the fact that he's a doll, a lot more. But one of the worst style choices of the remake that is maybe almost as bad as the look of Chucky is the horrible dialogue. Because pretty much not a single person in this movie is likable until you start to get to know Mike Norris and his mom a bit more. The dialogue is horrendous, but we've already been over how annoying Andy and all of his friends are. And I think that that might be one of the main factors that's holding the remake back. Because so much about the remake is actually good, sue me. But the characters are just so goddamn irritating. Lastly, we have to talk about the themes in either movie because both of them are actually abundant with quite rich life lessons. The original is about consumerism in America and retail marketing, basically. The fact that we put so much value into whatever is popular at the time, even if it's just a stupid little doll that can say a few phrases, that a mother will leave her post at her job to meet a peddler in the alley to make sure that her 6-year-old son has the exact doll that he wanted. That's a good lesson about quality control, right? Make sure you know where the stuff you buy is coming from. Be an educated consumer. Maybe it's also a lesson that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. Probably not though, because the capitalism Stockholm syndrome was so bad in the 80s that they told boomers that trickle-down economics will totally work, and they believed them. Oh, now look where we are. At least the themes of the original are super timeless, especially in a place like America. And also thank you to the original Child's Play for proving that a 6-year-old knows what's going on. For shame on more current horror movies that justify the presence of a demon in a family's home because their 6-year-old kid thought that it was their imaginary friend. I don't know about you, but I knew what the fuck was going on when I was a child. They're way more aware than screenwriters typically ever give them credit for. But that's not super relevant. Let's move on to the themes of the remake. So they for sure play off of the consumerism theme of the original, but now it's basically making commentary on the monopolies of Apple and Amazon. Buddy sort of represents Alexa and our smartphones that are constantly listening to us. This movie explores the idea that because all of our devices are connected and they're constantly learning from us and selling our data, things might eventually go sideways. All it took in this movie was the safety protocols being removed from one doll. That's another thing we need to touch on, is just about the mean-spirited nature of this movie. I'm a fan of the fact that the beginning of this movie shows this really shiny ad of people loving their new Buddy doll and everything is perfect and cheery, and then that immediately cuts to the factory where the dolls are actually produced and how horrendous the conditions are. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism, I'm telling ya. To meet the demands of the middle and upper classes, the lower classes have to suffer, and that's what the beginning of the movie was showing us. I think this scene does feel just a little bit out of place because it's showing someone so agonized with their working conditions that they set off an evil AI doll into the world and take their own life. It's a great scene, but the rest of the movie is not this self-serious critique on the working conditions under capitalism, so it's a little bit weird to me. And then it's also kind of halfway commenting on what happens to children when they get too lonely and dependent on their devices, because that's not really properly fleshed out. But believe me, if you gave Andy another couple years hanging out with that doll, he would be giving incel behavior. The movie didn't properly convey that though, in my opinion, because it was usually just used to serve as jokes. Like when Shane was falling off the ladder and stuff, his daughters were just glued to their phones and didn't even hear him screaming in agony. I read that as kind of a ha-ha moment because even if they did hear what was going on and try to help him, what are a 6 and 8-year-old gonna do about it? It's not really read as a, our poor youth, they are so stuck to their devices, you could be dying in your own home and they wouldn't care to notice. It's a horrifying thought though, right? So why doesn't it read that way? But anyway, that was kind of my last note on the themes. Let's get into our overall comparison and try to decide which is the superior film. I have some gripes with the decision to make the remake at all, and all the behind the scenes info and the fun featurettes have me leaning towards the original. In terms of the story, I think in the simplest terms, the stakes were just never high enough in the remake. Despite the idea that he could so easily just end up taking over every Buddy doll in the world, I guess, he was still so fixated on Andy, and for what? Do you want world domination or do you just want to fuck with Andy? Which is it? So the original definitely wins for story. You already know the characters are also winning in the original, we don't need to talk about it. Overall, there are a lot of wins for the remake. For example, another thing I didn't even mention, I think the score gore is incredible in the remake, and I do prefer it to the original. But none of the good things they did really outweighed all of the sins they committed that worked so well in the original, for instance, the look of Chucky. So the original wins overall in style, even if there are some things I do prefer in the remake. And lastly, I find the themes to be a lot more disturbing and impactful in the remake, but they're just not fleshed out in the slightest. Like, yes, robots can take over and constantly be listening to us, etc., but to what end? All our data is already being sold, Alexas, our phones already listen to us all the time, it's just our reality. So what about it? That's just my main question for the remake, because okay, so maybe they end up just killing everybody, is that it? So it's tough. I think that the original and remake are kind of on even ground in terms of the themes. Luckily, I have seen both of these movies, I think either 3 or 4 times each, so I can reflect on how I feel about them on a rewatch. The original is great, it's not my favorite of the franchise by any means, but I'll probably still rewatch it until I die. The remake surprised me so much this time around. I really do change my tune on movies sometimes, and I've yet to figure out why. My working theory is that I go in with such low expectations that the movie is always way better than I remembered. I enjoyed the remake this time around. I think I was a lot more desensitized to the annoying characters, and I just enjoyed it for the gore and the crazy action. Overall, I think that the most important factor to consider with these movies is actually the characters. They do make all the difference in the world in these particular movies. So going with my gut and my emotional connection to these movies, I'm gonna have to say that the original Child's Play will take the cake. And nobody was surprised. That's gonna do it for today's video, but before you go, I just really want to quickly tell you that we are currently crowdfunding for my next short horror film. Also, if you're new here, my creature acting debut Closed just released, so that'll be linked down below, as well as the GoFundMe where we're funding for our next project. My Patreon is also listed down below, so a huge thank you to all these lovely people. We got a handful of new members last month, and it's been so great chatting with you guys. So if you want to join that community and also get a ton of bonus content, including all of my initial reactions to all the movies I see in theaters, then that'll be linked down below as well. The rest of my social media will also be listed down below. I have a Poshmark where I'm selling a bunch of old clothes, etc., etc. I just hope that you enjoyed this comparison, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!